And the week started off with a bang as French Prime Minister François Bayrou found himself out of a job after calling for a confidence vote. He was trying to get his fellow lawmakers to pass an austerity budget, Bayrou warning that France's debt is unsustainable. On Tuesday, the French president named one of his closest allies, Sébastien Lecornu, to become the new prime minister. On Wednesday, the wave of nationwide protest blocked everything that many members of the government had said would wreak violent havoc came and went without much incident. On Thursday, a report commissioned by the French government recommended banning the social media app TikTok for those under 15. And on Friday, France saw its sovereign credit score downgraded. The Fitch agency, one of the leading global credit rating institutions, has downgraded France on its ability to pay back debts. The country went from AA- to A+. The decision comes as the country struggles with political instability and disagreements on how to put the country's strained public finances in order. On Monday, the country lost its fourth prime minister in a year over his budget plans. For more on all of this, we can bring in Paul Smith, Associate Professor and Head of French Studies at the University of Nottingham. Paul, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on.
As we've been discussing here, France has been dealing with a lot this past week. That government shakeup, a credit downgrade, national protests, all these things sort of tied together. And that kind of goes back to trying to pass a budget. Is the French economy in as dire shape as all of this seems to suggest?
I think the French economy is in a difficult position. I don't think anybody would argue the contrary. French debt, the French public debt has spiraled. It's grown to levels that other countries haven't seen. That's largely because of political decisions to respond to COVID, and even before COVID, to respond to the Gilets jaunes movement, to respond to COVID, to respond the way that the state intervened when the Russian invasion of Ukraine saw price of fuel go up and so forth. Various different factors have played here, and France is now faces a huge amount of public debt, and getting that debt down is, for most politicians, not all of them, the far left would say that it's not an issue. But most political parties agree that it is an issue, but the big disagreement is how you tackle that problem. And that's what Bayrou was trying to force the parties to accept his budget by giving him, or at least a sort of a preemptive vote on Monday, which we all knew actually he was very likely to lose, and he did. The big problem is how does France move forward on this question?
Now, Paul, stay with us because we're going to launch a report about the so-called Block Everything movement. And it did indeed fall short of its self-declared objective of a total disruption across the country. The Interior Ministry estimating that some 200,000 people took to the streets nationwide on Wednesday, while the country's largest union said that was closer to 250,000. But either way, the number likely falls short of what organizers were hoping for. Lauren Bearstecker takes a look back.
Answering calls to block everything, tens of thousands of people poured into the streets of France on Wednesday to pile pressure on the government. From Paris to Lyon to Marseille, protesters expressed a wide array of grievances, including anger at budget cuts, austerity measures, and broader inequality.
The government is telling us that the national debt is catastrophic and that we are forced to make sacrifices. But it's always the working class, social services, and the youth that have to pay, while the same people keep getting richer. We can't accept that.
After a fairly peaceful start to the day, tensions escalated in the afternoon as police clashed with protesters, firing tear gas and charging crowds in order to disperse them. Hundreds of arrests were made nationwide, with the Interior Minister blaming the violence on groups of left-wing radicals. Much of the anger was directed at Emmanuel Macron's latest prime minister appointment, making it a baptism by fire for Sébastien Lecornu on his first day in office.
We've already changed prime ministers, from new governments, voted on motions of no confidence. It's not the first time. But the reality is that Macron quickly appointed a new prime minister, and we know that the same policies will be implemented, the same austerity policies.
The Block Everything movement gained momentum across social media this summer after former Prime Minister François Bayrou announced a series of public spending cuts. And while Wednesday's turnout fell short of expectations, the movement could yet grow in size, as several unions who didn't join the protests are now calling for another nationwide day of demonstrations next week.
So, Paul, as we heard in that report, the movement did fall a little bit short on the day, but obviously people are very angry about the cost of living, rising prices, stagnant wages. Is there a possibility that this Block Everything could turn into another yellow vest type movement here in France?
I think that's always a risk. There are a lot of very disgruntled people in France. It's quite interesting that the numbers were not what the organisers had hoped. 250,000, let's take that as the figure. 200 to 250,000, that's still a fairly serious turnout. And of course, while the Yellow Vest movement really started with literally a bang, a big number at the beginning and kind of drifted a little bit, but stayed fairly steady, it's possible that this could grow. Of course, there's a major strike movement has been called for next Thursday, the 18th of September, and we'll see what the numbers are like there. That's a much more classic trade union-led movement, but it's still clear that there's a lot of disgruntlement, a lot of frustration and anger directed at the government. Of course, the new prime minister is in the process of negotiation with the political parties to see what is possible in terms of a new policy, a new budget, and other aspects of reform, particularly on pensions. And we'll see what impact that has. So we're kind of at the midpoint, I suppose, between what happened on Wednesday and what might or might not happen this coming Thursday, the 18th.
And as you mentioned, some of that anger directed at the French president's new pick for prime minister. We're going to take a closer look at that right now, so stay with us for a moment. François Bayrou's gamble in calling a confidence vote didn't pan out. On Monday, he saw himself voted out of a job by Parliament. Former Prime Minister had hoped that move would push lawmakers to adopt the austerity budget he was proposing. And now he's since been replaced by Lecornu, a close ally of French President Emmanuel Macron and the country's former defense minister.
We will also have to change. We will certainly have to be more creative, sometimes more technical, more committed in the way we work with our opponents. But I also say this, there will have to be changes, and not just in terms of presentation, not just in terms of method, there will also have to be changes in substance.
Now, Paul, we just heard there from the new prime minister that he's vowed to make a break and bring change. But as one of Emmanuel Macron's staunchest allies, how much change is he really going to be able to bring?
Well, that was a lovely clip, actually. I'm really glad you chose that one, because Lecornu, the things he was saying there to Bayrou, and you could kind of see Bayrou was biting his lip. That was, there's going to have to be changes in approach. That's really what Lecornu was saying. And I think that's the reason he's been chosen. It was a very interesting tactic. In the past, Macron has talk to the parties and try to find out who would be an acceptable figure. And this time that hasn't been what's happened. He's gone straight for Lecornu. And what he wants to try and do is Lecornu is known as much more of a diplomatic figure, not just in terms of being defense minister, but also in trying to reach out to the parties. Although, having said that, of course, he's a very close ally of Macron, exactly as you say, but of course he comes from the right. So his appointment, he's a former member of Les Républicains. It kind of buys off, it certainly gains a bit of support from the right-wing parties who were saying before Monday that if Macron, we knew that Bayrou was going to lose. If it was a socialist who was appointed, they wouldn't support the government. But what we're sort of seeing is a bit of a shift in mood on the right of the possibilities of opening up a government to the socialists. Of course, we're a long way from actually having any appointments. Who would be the figures? What's the policy? But also, of course, what Lecornu has emphasised and has already started talking to trade unionists about is reopening the conclave on, as they call it in France, on pensions. So we're still, just as we're at a midpoint in terms of social disruption, we're also at a midpoint really in terms of looking at what it is Lecornu can do. And his big hope, and this is the really, we can be very skeptical about this, we can be optimistic but also skeptical about his ability to hold on to the right, but also now to try and open his policies, his politics out to the left, because there have been a lot of false dawns under Emmanuel Macron, a lot of promises unfulfilled. And as one of the moderate trade union leaders has said, we need concrete written promises rather than these kind of, rhetorical flourishes.
I guess we're going to have to watch and see what he proposes. Thanks so much, Paul, for joining us today and discussing all things French. That's Paul Smith, Associate Professor and Head of French Studies at the University of Nottingham. After Iran floated a potential diplomatic solution to its detainment of 3 French nationals, France reiterated its unilateral demands this Friday. The French foreign minister was asked about his Iranian counterpart's comments earlier this week, suggesting the 3 French citizens being held in the country could potentially be exchanged for an Iranian student living in the French city of Lyon, who was arrested earlier this year over anti-Israel posts on social media. Let's listen to his response.
France consistently demands the immediate and unconditional release of our nationals in Iran, and I will not comment on the Iranian minister's remarks.
Why?
No comment.
But why?
Because it's a sensitive subject and one with immense gravity, so I cannot comment.
And finally, TikTok has found itself in the crosshairs of the French government. After multiple cases of suicides and suicide attempts among teens, an investigation was launched and the results are in. The Commission's report recommending that the social media app be banned for those users under 15. Solange Moujon has more.
The psychological effects are devastating. That is the conclusion of a French parliamentary report on what TikTok does to minors. MPs on the Commission say it is so harmful they want to ban it for those under 15. There's not only its addictive algorithm and its effects on self-esteem and sleep, but the Commission also heard from teens who say it encouraged suicide.
From one post to another, it gave self-harm techniques and ways to actually do it.
After 6 months of hearings, speaking to 178 experts and witnesses, and receiving 30,000 responses from citizens, the Commission gave a scathing review of TikTok.
We need to take back control over the lives of our young people and over our lives in general in France. And here it seems to me that there are a number of recommendations I'm making that can be implemented very quickly.
Among the 43 recommendations in the report, there is the ban for those under 15, the need for an awareness campaign, as well as the possibility of a digital curfew for 15 to 18-year-olds, where social media becomes inaccessible from 10 p.m. to 8 in the morning. The president of the Commission said there should be financial repercussions as well.
I think what matters to this Commission is to hold the platforms economically and financially accountable. If the platforms continue to endanger young people and not properly regulate themselves, then we need a tax system. The most dangerous will be taxed the most, and that will finance public spending, since ultimately it's spending on psychologists, on mental health, and more broadly, it's lives that are being destroyed.
TikTok, which is owned by the Chinese group ByteDance, says they're using AI to moderate and remove harmful content. They claim 95% is taken off within 24 hours. But French lawmakers say they found racist, sexist, anti-Semitic, and misogynist posts being pushed on young viewers who get hooked on the app.